Hey, Thom Hartmann here with the Thom Hartmann Program. We're on Facebook Live with Greg Palast, the investigative reporter, you know, from The Guardian and BBC News, Rolling Stone. His new book is out. It is available for pre-order today. It's called How Trump Stole 2020. Provocative? We'll be on until 4 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern time today, and we'll be taking your questions. We'll be joined by Josh Fox, David K. Johnston, Nomi Prinz, Barbara Arnwine, and others. And please don't forget to like us. And with us now, Greg Palast. Hey, Greg.
Hey, glad to be with you, Tom.
It is great having you with us. I love your new book. I have a pre-release copy of it here. You're such a brilliant storyteller. In one part of the book, you go back to the, was it the 17th? No, it was the 19th century. It was the 1800s in Pennsylvania, where the idea of registering people to vote started. Do they register people in Europe? I know your wife is
Swiss and British.
Is Swiss, as I recall.
Yeah, no, the Swiss don't register people. They register guns, not people. And that's confusing, to an American, because they don't assume that there are gazillions of people illegal voters trying to vote in their elections. And by the way, percentage-wise, they have a much bigger immigrant population, yet they don't feel that they're swarmed with illegal voters or illegal immigrants, aliens from outer space or Italy voting in their election. So, registration is just one more thing. We've gotten so used to some of these games that they play. Like now, one day they might say, oh yeah, the chip in your brain, of course everyone has to have that chip to vote. So we started with ID. We have all these other things happening in America that has been a long history of what we call vote suppression. But Tom, I got to tell you, I never use the term vote suppression, because when someone steals your car, you don't say, my car's been suppressed, my car's been suppressed. It's been stolen. So, and by the way, I know you said the title was provocative, How Trump Stole 2020, because the steal is on now. A lot of the action has happened, but I kind of think of the subtitle of the book as your final warning. They can't steal all the votes all the time, so please make my nightmare not come true. It's not a question, by the way, of whether I'm for or against Donald Trump. Vote how you want, but someone should be elected, not selected by trickery, which is, by the way, as I go into the book, I talk a lot about how Trump stole 2016, and they're at it again.
Yeah, and the technology, I mean, we know about Russian bots and troll farms and propaganda, and how Mark Zuckerberg opened up Facebook to the Trump campaign and, allowed them to lie their way into all kinds, and still is, actually. Zuckerberg is over 1,400 specific, individualized, niche-specific Trump ads that all contain naked lies. Zuckerberg has said, we can leave that on the Facebook platform, no problem.
Yeah, you can't be naked, but you can tell a naked lie. So explain that to me. So the book goes into detail. It's a short book. It's meant to be, so that you have enough time to fix it before once you're done with it. And thank you for the kind words. Again, the book is How Trump Stole 2020, which is available now. I do have a chapter in which I cribbed from you, though I do cite you, called The Second Time as Farce, as in Karl Marx's phrase, history repeats itself. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. And, the first time, I do go a bit back into the 2000 race when, with The Guardian and BBC television, I uncovered that Katherine Harris, you may remember her, the Secretary of State, Cruella de Vil of Florida, targeted 94,000 voters as felons, and their only crime was voting while black. And I'm not kidding that it was black because it says BLA right next to their names. I got that list. And by the way, that story was not reported except by you and others in the U.S. press. But we did have exactly 0 illegal voters in Florida on that list. But that elected George Bush. Now, that was the tragedy. Now we have the farce with Agent Orange as president. And I'm very worried about what's coming out here. The book, by the way, is it's quite fresh. I literally just finished writing it. Even though it's just available today, it was finished about 4 days ago. And it has that special chapter, The Virus Votes for Trump. And that's one of the issues I want to talk with you about today, if we can, about that we have to look, as I say in the book, we either vote by mail or we die. And in fact, Dr. Fauci has said he doesn't think it's going to be safe by November to walk into a polling station. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be safe. So we're going to have to mail in votes or come up with other systems. And I'm very, very concerned about how that's happening. And so I have that special chapter in the book. And I just had that excerpted, or a piece of it, in Nation of Change this week. I'm very concerned, for example, Tom, that we have, that according to MIT studies, 22% of all mail-in ballots never get counted. Let me repeat that, 22%. Now, if we're talking about 80% mail-in voting, that's a little over 100 million mail-in votes. That would be 25 million votes not counted. Most of it, by the way, Tom, is that, for all kinds of reasons, postage due. In Wisconsin, in Minnesota, you have to have a second signature, a witness. And for example, that's one of the, in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court overturned an order by the governor saying you didn't need that witness signature because you could literally kill yourself for your witness. Right now, they had that in the primary, and so people didn't put in the witness signature, got their ballots thrown out. So 8 states have a witness signature requirement. People don't know that. Almost 250,000 ballots were thrown out because they didn't have that second signature. And in 3 states, by the way, you have to have your ballot notarized. Good luck in the lockdown. And that's just the beginning of the problems.
Right, and yet, 2 points. Number one, South Korea just held their elections. President Moon, who has been way ahead of the curve on this, no pun intended, he's flattened the curve. Mm-hmm. With national testing, now they're doing serological testing, looking for people who are post-COVID, who might, be great to re-enter the workforce, things like that. He was overwhelmingly reelected, but they did it with polling places, and they had this very rigorous procedure. You had to stand 6 feet apart from people coming in. When you came in, you had to do a hand sanitizer thing. Then you were given rubber gloves to put on, and you had to be wearing a mask. And then you went and you voted. And after on your way out, you had to take off the rubber gloves and throw them in the trash. And you got another hand sanitizer thing and a brand new mask. And they just had this whole thing down. It was like a well-oiled machine. And South Koreans showed up and they voted. And we'll know in a few weeks if that produced a big spread of virus. And it's going to be an international experiment that a lot of people are looking at. But there's that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then secondly, I live in Oregon. Mm-hmm. We've had vote by mail for a decade. And outside of people who forget to put postage on their stamps, on their envelopes, I don't think that there's pretty much any loss of ballots here. Or are there? Are there people being denied their ballots because their signature doesn't match? I mean, that's the only other thing I could think of.
Well, couple things. You're Secretary of State. Here's the bad news. 3 states have had experience with all mail-in voting, or unless you do something else, unless you specifically have a problem that requires you to come in. Oregon, Colorado, Washington. Oregon's had the best experience in the longest. But I got to tell you, in Washington and Colorado, the minority vote in those states has fallen off a cliff. You went down where you had black and white voters turned out about the same when you had in-precinct voting in Colorado. Now, black voting mail-in is about 50% of white voting in Colorado. We've also had a disaster in Washington State with minority voting.
Why is that?
And we'll be talking with Barbara Arnwine, who's deeply concerned because it's not a community which has experience with the mail-in balloting, and you make a mismark on the ballot. My parents, who are actually white voters, lost their ballot because they put check marks instead of filling in the little bubble next to a name on their absentee ballot. So you have to learn how to do it. We have to work on it. And Oregon, your Secretary of State said, I hope to God no other state adopts our system, because Oregon was the first. Because in Oregon, you actually try to help voters vote. And when a voter's signature is in question, they try to contact the voter and say, can you correct this? Or you forgot your signature. postage due, and I believe in Oregon, you actually pay for the postage. This is crucial. It's not a minor thing. In Ohio, you had to put on your own postage, and they had a little square, where you put the little stamp. Well, but if you didn't put 2 stamps, you lost your vote. And they know who's losing their vote. For example, if you mismark your ballot on absentee ballots, according to another MIT Caltech study, if you are African American, you're 5 times more likely to have your ballot challenged and rejected if you are if you're a black voter due to a mismark on the ballot, an undervote or an overvote. You put an extra mark on it, you use the wrong, and then there's the problem of the wrong envelopes, etc. In Oregon, it's the voter intent rules, but you still have one of the 6% of your votes actually don't get counted. That's better than the 22% nationwide on absentee ballots, but it's a dangerous thing, and it's not. And if it were random, if it were Republicans or Democrats, it wouldn't matter, but it isn't. There's a real racial problem, and in states where they don't want you to vote, Tom, dig this: Ohio refused to send out 1,039,000 absentee ballot request cards to voters who are on their so-called inactive list. That inactive list, which is massively inaccurate, is 2-to-1 Democrats. The Republican Secretary of State would not mail out cards to even get an absentee ballot if you were on that list. Again, 2-to-1 Democrats. So you've got a big problem, but we can fix these things because we've got to fix these things. And first of all, we have so much, just so you know, we have so much mail-in balloting now already. About 30% of the public does it anyway, even before the virus. We got to fix this thing. And one of the biggest things, Tom, if you don't get a ballot, you can't mail, it's not mailed to you, you can't get it back. And that's the big problem. Ohio wouldn't send out 1 million of these ballots. Georgia, where Brian Kemp elected himself governor because he was Secretary of State and manipulated the voter rolls to beat Stacey Abrams. Well, they're doing the same trick as we're coming into 2016, where Kemp has announced he's not going to send out almost 1 million ballots to voters that he says are inactive or he says have moved away, etc. And by the way, just so you know, inactive means you missed a couple elections, supposedly. The National Voter Registration Act says in big, literally bold letters, you cannot lose your vote because you chose not to vote or couldn't vote.
Oh, the Supreme Court has overruled that, though.
Yeah, the Supreme Court's given, well, you'll see in my book, the Supreme Court has said, well, like, for example, in my book, I have this whole investigation, which I did, and now working with Stacey Abrams, where I looked at the people who were removed for not voting and understand what the Republicans are doing in Ohio and we're doing in Georgia and now it's moving like, I hate to say it, a virus into about 20 other states. They're saying if you don't vote, that's evidence you've moved away. You've left, if someone's left Georgia or Ohio, they shouldn't vote in Georgia or Ohio. But I had experts, the people that really know this stuff, and guess who knows where you are at any minute is, of course, Amazon. I used Amazon's experts who used 240 databases to know exactly where you are last Tuesday, where you were. They can tell you with they can say 96% certainty, because in that week of delay, some people actually do move and die. They said that the Georgia list and the Ohio list, and we just looked at the Wisconsin list in the book, as I mentioned, it's 71% wrong. You know what they just did? They said that in Wisconsin, again, when they're trying to bend this last election, they're trying to bend 2016. They are trying to remove 250,000 people. The new governor and the new elections board chief, who are Democrats, have asked me and my team to go through their voter list. And the 250,000 people that the Republican legislature is insisting be removed from the voter rolls. Again, there's 170,008 voters, I can tell you exactly, who they said have moved, and they haven't, including, for example, they said that a woman, Saquonna Taylor has moved out of Milwaukee. I don't think so, because Saquonna Taylor, when I spoke to her, said she is still in Milwaukee and she is still the Milwaukee County Supervisor. But she is a black woman. So if you're wondering why she is on the list, I got to tell you that the list smells of Jim Crow in Wisconsin. I want to remind you, as you'll get in the book, by the way, how Trump stole 2020, because they're stealing it now. We can steal it back if we're aware of these things. Stop it. I'm very, very concerned. Donald Trump supposedly won Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. In the book, I also discuss what happened with ID, and it's going to happen again in 2016. There are 182,000 University of Wisconsin students who are required to show photo ID, state photo ID, in order to vote. All of them have state photo ID from Wisconsin as University of Wisconsin students. Those IDs cannot be used, Tom, to vote. Trump won. That law was put into effect 2 weeks before the 2016 election. It's still on the books. That's how Donald Trump was supposedly elected, by winning Wisconsin by 22,000 votes, excluding almost 200,000 University of Wisconsin students. Now, it's true, they can go get a new ID if they go to the Dean of Students office, which of course is shuttered.
Or to the DMV, and which may or may not be open and may or may not be filled with people who are coughing. So, Greg, from the 6% loss in the mail-in states, principally in minority communities, to all these hinky little laws, they're not little, but these various laws in other states. You've got to have another person, a witness sign it, or you've got to have a notary, or you've got to have a letter from your doctor in order to even qualify to get a mail-in ballot, and blah, 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 blah. Is there, Ron Wyden and Earl Blumenauer have proposed, Wyden in the Senate, Blumenauer in the House, they're both from Oregon here,
yes,
have proposed a substantial piece of legislation to produce a nationwide standard for vote by mail and to fund it so that the states don't have an unnecessary burden in terms of getting things printed and establishing functionally a new bureaucracy to do this. What are the lessons that we can learn from that? What are the changes in law that need to be made? And can they be made, fell swoop at the federal level? Will the Supremacy Clause allow them to override state laws? Or are, in some cases, these prohibitions or restrictions built into state constitutions, in which case you've got a whole other level of difficulty?
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about our Supremes. Are they going to save us? Well, as one suspended candidate for president says, we need a revolution. It's a political action that's going to push this. And we saw this in a way in Wisconsin last Tuesday, when a vast majority of people voted to throw out the right-wing Wisconsin justice who had ordered this horrendous election. He was literally on the ballot and knew that if he could hold an election during the virus, he would cut the vote in Milwaukee, which he did. And so he thought by eliminating black voters in Milwaukee, he could win. But so many people were disgusted, including Republicans, that he was thrown out on his keister. Now, literally how many people will die from lining up for that vote, I don't know. But, people are not crazy about vote theft. Chris Kobach lost the governor's race in Wisconsin.
And Kansas.
In Kansas. Thank you very much. Chris Kobach of Kansas. Sometimes if I forget it, just think KKK. Chris Kobach of Kansas, who was the vote thief in chief for Donald Trump, and that's also in How Trump Stole 2020. He's the guy who came up with the cross-check list. Well, my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, was shown by the League of Women Voters 60 times during the election period in Kansas. And Republicans voted against Chris Kobach. And you have a Democratic governor of Kansas to a great extent because, believe it or not, there's a lot of Americans, including of the Republican persuasion, that kind of believe in democracy, that you should be allowed to vote. And they didn't like the idea that you were removing voters based on having names like Rodriguez and Garcia, etc. So, there's kind of, I think we can have an uprising in America to say, let's do this right. And a lot of white people don't want to have to go get, and Republicans don't want to have to get a notary public and take the chance of killing themselves or the guy with the stamp just to be able to vote.
Yeah, yeah. So, Greg, your book, How Trump Stole 2020, is, I mean, this is a very ominous title.
Very.
What, there are some right now who are predicting that there's going to be an absolute blue landslide that will resemble 1932, that just, wiped out the Republican Party literally for 3 generations. The Republicans didn't functionally get the House back until Bill Clinton, until the mid-90s when Newt Gingrich came in. And there are others who are saying, yeah, there may be enough people who are motivated to vote and want to vote and are furious and all that kind of thing to make that happen. But the Republican control of the voter suppression or vote theft machine is so complete, at least in the red states and in the few swing states that are controlled by Republican governors or Republican secretaries of state, or even just Republican legislatures, like Kentucky, where you've got a Democratic governor, that it won't matter. The fix is in. How much, like a tick, how screwed in are these Republicans in their vote theft?
Well, I can give you some exact number. The one thing I've done in the book, I spent a lot of time with I used to be a statistician in another life before I got the investigative reporter hat. And it's about 7.9 million votes are lost in our elections through blocking legitimate voters from voting, through throwing away your ballot because it didn't have that second stamp or second signature on the mail-in ballot, through long lines. That's a smaller one, but that's about 250,000 people who just can't vote because the lines are too long. So we know, so the tricks are huge. It's huge. But then you did have Obama win in 8 and 12. And my co-author at Rolling Stone, Bobby Kennedy, he can do something I can't. He could call up Obama on his BlackBerry, which he's not supposed to have. He does anyway. And he knew all the tricks, but he said, listen, what we do is overwhelm them. You overwhelm the steal because they can't steal all the votes all the time. And I got to tell you, like in the book, I have the story about Ohio, and not how Obama lost, because he won Ohio in 8 and 12. Though Clinton supposedly lost Ohio in 16. Believe me, she didn't, if you counted all the votes and let everyone vote who was allowed to vote. But for example, in Ohio, you'll love this, Tom, to be fair, the Republican Secretary of State says every county gets one early voting station. One. So that's fair, he says. So that means they literally have a county of 14,000 people, including cows. They get one voting station. And Cleveland, with 1 million people, gets one voting station. I was there in 12 and 8. And in 8, the line for the one polling station in Dayton, Ohio, which is Montgomery County, was 5 hours. In Cleveland, it was a 7-hour wait on the early voting Souls to the Polls Day, the Sunday before the polling. And by the way, that's when they took absentee ballots for a test drive. I tell the story about how when you went in for early voting, and in most states, when you go in for early voting, you just vote on a machine or you vote on whatever mechanism they have, and that's your vote. You're voting, but you're voting early. In the case of Ohio, and a couple of other states picked this up, when you went in to vote, you actually put in a request for an absentee ballot right there at the polling station, waited in line another hour to exchange your request for an absentee ballot and fill it out. Now, you have to fill out the request correctly, and you have to fill out the ballot correctly and the envelope correctly. So what was this all about? I asked the county supervisor, the county clerk in charge of the vote, I said, these people are here. Why are they voting absentee? And he said, because they can challenge the ballot after the fact. The great attorney, Bob Fitrakis, I said, they're giving out absentee ballots, Bob, not real ballots. He said, even these guys wouldn't pull a dumb trick like that. That's bullshit. So I drove through the night to, it was after midnight that I got to the home of the lawyer, Bob Fitrakis, Professor Fitrakis, and I said, here is the absentee ballot and the absentee ballot request. This is what they're handing out. And he says, look, this is why they can knock these things out. You have to fill out, for example, it has a line in there for your driver's license number. Now, who doesn't have driver's license? Low-income people who don't have cars. If you don't fill in your driver's license number and you leave it blank, you lose your vote. If you have to put in no driver's license. Doesn't say that, okay? But if you don't, boom, you're gone. And by the way, this is why, I don't know if you remember that incident where Karl Rove was losing his shit on Fox TV when Fox called the Ohio and the election on the night of in November of 2012 for Obama. And Rove said, I just got off the phone with the Secretary of State, and it's not over because they have to go over the early ballots, the early vote ballots. So they thought that they could steal it by voiding about 200,000 of those votes. 70% of African Americans vote early in Ohio. So this was the trick, but Fitrakis, because I tipped him off, actually went into federal court and busted it before they could pull the trick. But that's why Karl Rove was saying this election ain't over. Because they literally thought that after the fact they could disqualify those Ohio ballots. Boom. So that's some of the tricks. That's why I say how Trump stole it, because we have to steal it back. We have to protect our vote. We have to overwhelm them. And it's not a question of whether you're for or against Trump. It's a question of whether you're for or against democracy. So, in other words, no matter how big the steal is, and like I said, in 16 it was 7-9. I actually have some pretty clear numbers and break it down how it works out. But it's about 7.9 million votes out of 140 million cast. But that's a big thumb on the scale because the steal is concentrated in Ohio, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina, Virginia may have some problems too. They may have Democratic governors in some cases, but they don't have the legislatures or the laws or the courts, and they certainly don't have the Supreme Court. So we got a problem, but we can do something about it. That's why kind of the book is, I think of it as your ballot condom. It's going to protect your vote.
Is it possible that a single piece of federal legislation could fix this?
Yeah, if it's not challenged in the courts. I mean, we just had a problem, for example, in New Mexico this week, where the Secretary of State took up one of my recommendations that I've been making to Secretaries of State: mail everyone a ballot. Just mail everyone a ballot. Colorado, by the way, does something like that. I mean, just mail it. And if you don't want to mail it and you want to walk in or early vote or have another way of presenting, fine, throw away the ballot. People don't vote twice. You go to jail for 5 years. It does not happen. I don't care what a psychopathic narcissist says. I won't mention his name. About vote fraud and mail-in ballots. It doesn't happen, okay? And so mail everyone a ballot. That's what New Mexico tried to do. A right-wing group called True the Vote went to court, and the conservative courts, a federal judge there, threw out the proposal to send every voter a ballot. They still have to go through the whole process of requesting the ballot. Now, understand, Tom, to request that ballot, you got to get the card that says, "Do you want an absentee ballot?" Well, who moves? Students, young people, renters. You don't get the card. This is, again, the MIT study says the biggest single problem is that people literally don't get that ballot. So we need to just say everyone gets the ballot, and you have places where you can pick up ballots. People don't fill out 16 ballots. In fact, just to give you an idea, the number of people convicted of voter impersonation in America in the past 12 years is 6. That means you're about 15 times more likely to get hit and killed by lightning than you are to fill out a second or impersonate someone and fill out their absentee ballot.
Right. So, not to leave people in despair.
We can fix it. We can fix it.
What can we individually do? What can I do? What can you do? What can somebody watching this right now do to fix this system so that it's not, constantly rigged purely to elect, sycophants to the billionaire class on the Republican side?
Aha. Well, as my publisher would say, get How Trump Stole 2020, which does have a guide in it. But number one, protect your own vote. And that means check your registration. I don't care if you've been voting at the same damn voting station for 30 years. I have, in the book, the photo of Christine Jordan, who I met at the polling station in Atlanta. She was going to vote for her 50th year of voting. She's 92 years old, Martin Luther King's cousin. And they said, you're off the voter rolls. Get out of here. She lost her vote. She didn't check her registration beforehand. They've removed 17 million people in the last 2 years. 17 million people have been purged from the voter rolls. Check your registration. I did in California and found out it said no such voter. I re-registered online. Do it. So you're not going to get your ballot if you're not registered, if you've been purged, if they decide you moved, or if your name is Garcia and there's another guy named Garcia, and believe it or not, in another city who's registered to vote, say, oh, you're voting in 2 places. Check your registration is number one. Number two, if you don't get your absentee ballot in time, make sure, you're going to have to send a note or call up your county clerk and get your ballot. Again, it may be that your registration is faulty. Second, if you do need that second signature, it's awful. Make sure that you read that ballot and the instructions so carefully. Souls to the polls in one church is going to be replaced by souls to the post. But it's going to have to be done virtually where we do training. Maybe you and I, Tom, will make a little video. Here's how you fill out your absentee ballot. Don't forget, don't leave driver's license blank just because you have no driver's license. No driver's license. You have to know the rules for each state. We can do this. We can beat the ballot bandits. We can beat the ballot bandits. And yes, we should pass a national law. My God, the Wyden bill is it's obvious. It does such simple things as say that, as in Oregon, it's postage prepaid ballot. You don't have to figure out the number of stamps you need on this thing. Also, make sure that you know what your signature is. I also believe that we should stop this stuff of challenging signatures. Unless we know an absentee ballot has been stolen. We don't have this crime. Like I say, it's comes out to 1/2 person a year steals someone's ballot and mails it in. That's it.
Well, I know in the UK maybe 10 years ago or so, there was a big scandal where there was somebody, going around in a relatively poor neighborhood in London buying ballots for 10, 15 pounds each, filling them out and mailing them in. Do they not require a signature there? Or, also they came down on that person really, really hard. It was a huge scandal.
Yeah, they're in the Tower of London.
Yeah. People went to prison. It's to the best of my knowledge. It's the exception that proves the rule, just like the theft in
North Carolina. It's so easy to find.
North Carolina. I had I think it was Grover Norquist. I had one of these right wingers on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how they tried to steal an election in North Carolina. They're going around buying it. I'm like, that was a Republican doing that. And he's like, yeah, it could be done. And, but I really think these are the exceptions that prove the rule. Are there any lessons that we can learn from foreign countries that have been voting for years and years, advanced democracies, fully developed democracies that we would admire, we would want to emulate?
Well, as I say, my own, my wife is both a Swiss, she gets to vote in both Swiss elections and in British elections. And they trust the voters not to cheat. But if you cheat, you're in the Tower of London. Things are pretty right because it's easy to find someone. I talked to Chris Kobach of Kansas, Mr. KKK, and he said, he said it's really easy to find vote thieves. Now, understand, when he was Secretary of State, he literally had the power to go and arrest people. So I said, it's really easy to find vote thieves, and you said there are 5 million illegal aliens voting. Have you arrested 5? No. He arrested one who was in his entire career of hunting for vote thieves, of alien voters. He found one who was an American citizen who registered just before his citizenship ceremony. That was his big crime. And now the state of North Carolina, hired a guy named Stu Burr, Agent Stu Burr of the FBI. I have his picture in my book, How Trump Stole 2020. And he had a staff, this FBI agent, Chris Kobach's list of illegal voters, and he spent a year and millions of state money hunting illegal voters and got exactly 0 voters in North Carolina who were illegal voters. 0. So other nations trust people who come in to vote. And in Britain, you come in and vote, and it's all, by the way, it's all on paper. Same with Switzerland. The Swiss ballot maker asked me, say, well, you know, we'll give America the design for our ballots so they won't screw up. And I said, they don't want, you don't get it. They don't want ballots that can be counted. They want ballots that can't be counted. And I want, by the way, I know you've been praising my book, but I got to tell you, as I say in one of my chapters, I steal greatly from your book. Thom Hartmann has written an insanely important book. It goes with mine. They're a great pair because I'm talking about what's going to happen in 2020. Thom has written The Hidden History of the War on Voting. And because, in fact, Thom, I don't know if you if you remember these stories, but it goes back to George Washington and Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson in their first battles to open up the vote to Catholics, to Jews, and so they could vote themselves because they were deists, which is borderline atheist in those times, and they believed that the Lord created the world and endowed all humans with certain inalienable rights, but then he kind of left it up to us to screw it up or do good. And those people like Thomas Jefferson couldn't actually vote because they would have to swear an oath in Virginia to the Lord Jesus. That left out Catholics, Jews, and the deists, which are most of our founding fathers. So that your book lets people understand this was not just invented by Tricky Dick and Karl Rove. This is a long history and a long fight. And what's the most important lesson from the hidden history of your book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting?
Well, I think it's the quote that's usually attributed to Joseph Stalin, which is that it doesn't matter who votes. What matters is who counts the votes. And, the codicil, or the thing that I would add to that now, is it matters who's allowed to vote, which is essentially who's allowed to keep the registration, contemporary, current, and use the vote. And so those are the two pieces: whether you can vote in the first place, and all the barriers that are put into place, and then secondly, who's counting the vote and how and under what circumstances, and what little tricks and rules are they using to try to prevent. To avoid counting your vote.
And actually,
you've done such a great job of educating us all on that, Greg.
Well, that's the whole thing. In How Trump Stole 2020, what I try to bring out is we've now become aware of trickery like using voter ID. As I said, Texas, Wisconsin, other states, you can't use your student photo ID, but you can use your gun registration or your concealed carry license to vote. Right. We know about that, but I really want to emphasize, and the book emphasizes, the new purge mania. 17 million people. And by the way, Greg Palast didn't pull this out of his hat, the 17 million. These numbers and the 7.9 million votes not counted come from a group called the Elections Assistance Commission. It's a federal agency, which of course Donald Trump's doing his best to defund because he doesn't want you to know how he was selected, not elected.